Hi everyone, I wanted to share our thoughts on the Zhiyun Crane M2. Last video, I think, we shot that video the night that we bought it. So first time using a gimbal, first time setting up, it was hard, to be honest with you. But now we've actually taken it on a trip to Perth. We used it pretty extensively, and I thought it would be good to share our unsponsored, unsolicited thoughts on the Zhiyun Crane M2. So last time I think you saw me struggling to balance, and I think it was because maybe I didn't fully understand like the different axes and then which part was controlling which axes, or which axis. So now I think it's pretty easy, and I'm going to show you how to balance the M50, and I think last time it took me an hour. I think this time I can probably do it in about 1-2 minutes. One of the tips I think I saw on the YouTube video, which I thought was pretty good, was this, the main locking screw, when not in use, I will typically keep it here on the quarter screw hole that's actually on the gimbal itself. So I keep that there, and I usually keep the plate in. But I'll show you now quickly balancing the M50. I think there's a few videos on this out on YouTube, so probably this is a bit repetitious. But here you have the base plate. So the base plate always needs to be the flat side facing outwards. And for larger cameras, you use the longer hole. And so we can just put it roughly in the middle here. And later on, I will share a little bit about, I think, some of the limitations, and one of them actually is this base plate. I'll go into more details on that later. So after that, the base plate slides in. And the first thing I do always, of course, you need to actually set your camera, let's say, in the position that you're going to have it, lens cap off. I have it on 15, that's typically where we put it, 15 mm. So the first thing I do is I always unlock the red one first, the big red screw first. And then you can lift this up and extend this out. And that's kind of where we start. And because there's the memory screw in the back here, you can see that it's almost already, in terms of the roll, it's almost there. I think it's a little bit off, so I will need to adjust that a little bit. That's pretty good. And then the front back. So this is the limitation I was talking about earlier, because the same screw that you use to mount the camera on the mounting plate, you also need to use that same screw to adjust that kind of front and back balance. And then specific to the M50, and I find this is a limitation that where the camera is in a way, or the gimbal is in a way probably more suited for Sony cameras that don't have the viewfinder, because sometimes you have some clashing here between the gimbal and the eyepiece. But actually it's not such a problem. I think we were able to get this balanced pretty well, but I think this is probably the one that's the harder one to balance, which is the pitch when it's facing upwards. I think this is specifically for vortex mode. Okay. So this can turn on now. Oops, sorry. Unlock my, yep. And so there you go. So default is in pan follow mode, which only allows you to adjust with the joystick the up and down, the vertical axis, but of course it's really meant for that, right? And then the lock mode, which is great, which actually allows you to adjust all of the directions, but more or less allows you to do this. And I think you can see a lot of people ask, can you use it inverted? Yeah, definitely you can. And in fact, I think a lot of times I'm liking the shots doing it inverted. You can hear just now, I have, if you're inverted, but you come back at an angle, your base plate will hit the gimbal. So this is a problem, obviously. I think, again, a limitation of the M50 on this setup. 2 taps to reset. So POV is probably the mode that I've had the most difficulty with, and I think it has a lot to do with the balancing of the M50, where it's really up at the top end of the weight limit. I only have the 15 to 45, the kit lens on here. I think the combined weight is around 670 or so, so it's within the limit. So you can see you can do 360, but I'm doing it pretty carefully. It doesn't feel super stable and secure at that weight. It can be done. I would do it slowly. Like I said, I think there's always some clashing in terms of that base plate hitting the frame. It's really close with a lot of these moves. Okay, and I think there's been some questions about, can you do vortex? Sure. So you double tap to go into go. Go is basically for quick movements, for following sports or animals or kids. And then if you double tap the mode again, you're in vortex. And in vortex, you can do this. You can see my you see, axis lock. So I think there is some balance issues. I've been able to get this to work in the field when I'm using it, but it does have some balancing issues in vortex. Okay, here are a few thoughts on the Zhiyun Crane M2 before I go and show you some samples of it in action. The first thing is that really, I think in general, having a gimbal, I mean, whether it's this one or another one, really changed the experience of having this camera and using it for vlogging and kind of this mini filmmaking. I think it is it's a huge advantage, and this one is especially unobtrusive and something that you can carry it around. I think I used it on the streets, I used it all over the place. I used it in the airport, and people do look, but you're not getting kind of that disapproving looks that you may get with a bigger setup. The second one is that, of course, the size and the weight are pretty ideal. I use this in a very small bag. And you can see with the tripod piece off, it's really very small. And it's pretty unobtrusive, and it's something that can fit in to the bag pretty easily. Half the time I actually use it with the camera on, and I store it locked up like that in not a typical travel bag, right? I will just bring this in a small shoulder bag. So the third point I think on this is that balancing can be a bit of an issue, and I think that may be specific to the M50. I'm not sure. I've used this with the phone, and I think it's not such a problem. But the M50, because of the viewfinder and maybe because of how it sits on the base plate, you can see the base plate sticking out here. These two areas are areas where it often hits the gimbal arms in rotation. Having the base plate screw also be the front-back adjustment screw is pretty annoying because it also means that every time I want to change the battery or access the memory card, I need to pull this out. And once I touch this, all of my settings on the camera in terms of, or on the gimbal in terms of the balance are off, so it has to be rebalanced again. The battery lasts very long. I think we recharged every night, and it had only been down to like 70%. So, and we used it pretty extensively. So I can say that battery is probably not an issue on this. Definitely more of an issue on the M50 than it is on the gimbal. Obviously, we're still figuring out the different usage of the modes. POV, as I said, I think that one, and Vortex, I think because of the weight of the camera and maybe the balance, they're not so ideal for the M50. The app, we're still trying to figure out how to connect this to the app. I think I've asked this question on a number of YouTube videos now to other creators. Apparently, this record button should be able to be used as well as take pictures. That would have been really, really handy on the trip. It's always something where you're pressing the record button and then you're kind of figuring out your shot. It would be much better to be able to be used this button. Apparently, it can be done. I just haven't figured it out yet. The other thing is that it worked really well connecting to our Mi Photo backpacker tripod. So the quarter screw can just turn onto the tripod, and then this combination is great for stills and photography and for setup shots while on a trip. See, the other thing is that I think this has about 2.5 weeks of usage on it, and already the finish on here in certain places has already started rubbing off. So that nice black finish, I think, is probably very much only a surface finish, and something that's probably going to rub off pretty quickly. But you know, this is a tool. I don't see it as something that needs to be precious, but you know, you can see here, and I'll give some zoom-in shots and detail shots on this, but you can see places where the finish is rubbed off pretty quickly. Like even here, I think on the bottom of the base plate obviously is also a place. So the last thing is that I think it seems very much aimed towards Sony mirrorless in terms of the top end of the weight. I mean, even in the instructions are pretty terrible. They keep telling you to download the full instructions, which I did, but even using that, you can see that like especially with the connection of the app or balancing, it's not very well explained in the instructions. There are some great videos out there now that are explaining a lot of the nuances of how to set this up, but the instructions that you get or the instructions that they use for it are not great. All that being said, I would highly recommend this. I think for the price, we paid a little bit cheaper, I think, than the US list price. We got it here in Singapore, the Singapore edition, and it just came out recently. So given all that, the price was pretty fair for, I think, what has become a pretty essential part of our travel photography and filmmaking kit. So for me, definitely I would highly recommend this. I give it an 8.5 out of 10. To me, the really only places to improve on this would probably be the balancing in terms of how this base plate doesn't have to be part of the balancing process, so it's not necessarily resetting the balancing every time I have to access the battery or the memory card. And then also, of course, because the M50, I think there's limitations for it because of the shape and the size of it. So you know, it does seem like a product that somehow is aimed very squarely at Sony mirrorless rather than the Canon M series, but maybe the M6 or the M100 may be better suited for this. Yep. So now I'm going to show you a few samples from our trip of the gimbal in use. Great. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Please click subscribe if you did. Thanks very much.